Thank you very much for coming to our committee today, and it's nice to have another Western Canadian. I know Senator Pless and I appreciate that. I was wondering if you could just expand on something for us. You mentioned in your opening remarks, which I know are, have to be a brief 5 minutes, that the practice of vouching does not meet those standards that you earlier referenced, and I wanted to give you a little bit more time to expand on your considered views on that particular topic.
The biggest concern with vouching is transparency. In a community where everybody knows everyone, then you're not going to have anyone walk in and vouch for someone because they'll know that person is not a citizen because everyone knows everyone. Well, the fact is, in 99% of our communities in Canada, they're too big for us to know everyone. So vouching just doesn't work anymore. Maybe it did work at one time, but it doesn't work now because there's not enough of a community in terms of people knowing each other. And so when you vouch, and there's this affidavit that says, I know this person, there's no ability for the community as a whole to hold accountable the two individuals who swore that affidavit. Yes, we could get an audit. There could be an audit, and we could track down each and every one of those individuals through a process that would be very, very expensive. But there's nothing wrong, in my view, with the Parliament of Canada taking the position that it's up to the individual voter to exercise that right. Individuals in the North have to travel hours to vote. So each of us has a duty to take some effort to exercise the franchise, to exercise that right to vote. And the vouching system, as it was, did work at a time when we all knew each other. But today we don't know each other. And because of that, there may be an extra burden placed on someone who doesn't have an ID today. They will need to be informed that next time they want to go vote, they're going to have to get that piece of paper. But I don't know of any jurisdiction that is not in a position to give them that photo ID between now and the next election.
Right, and of course, a photo ID in itself is not required. That can be one of the types of ID that
Sure.
People use, but if people don't have a photo ID, there are many others. There's 39, in fact, other types of ID that are allowable, and within that are some of the attestation of residence for a First Nations band or reserve, or a shelter, a soup kitchen, student or seniors residence, or long-term care facility. All of those, many of those groups might have trouble getting regular type of ID that we would think of, but to me those are fail-safe methods that assist with a more transparent method than a vouching system would. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, and the reality is today, there are very few individuals that do not have a photo ID. If they want one, no matter who they are, in every province they can get one of those identification documents. Regardless of who they are, regardless of their circumstances, even if they are institutionalized, there is a process in place where they can get the ID and then participate through one of the many ways that you've already discussed earlier today.
Right. Thank you.
Jean-Pierre Kingsley appeared earlier today, and he talked about vouching, and of course he has a significant background in Elections Canada, and I'm not sure if he was speaking on behalf of himself or simply supporting the idea of vouching with the voucher and the vouchee, if you will, taking an oath. And do you have any views on that approach to if vouching was maintained?
Well, I did hear what he had to say. I was watching it on closed circuit, but my concern with the approach that he presents is that it doesn't address the fundamental problem, and that is we have no means to make the vouching act transparent to all other voters. The only way that we can hold accountable the two individuals, even if they swear one document together, the only way is through an audit that is very expensive and would have to track down those individuals even if they could be tracked down. So the process is fraught with potential for fraud and abuse, and it's that potential that we should be concerned about. We don't have to here today call any Canadian fraudulent when it comes to voting. We're not saying that. What we are saying is we don't want others who are not Canadians coming in and taking part in a process and, in fact, creating credibility gaps for our election. And the process that he identified, in my view, does nothing to address the credibility gap that currently exists when you allow vouching.
Okay, thank you. We're going to start a second. No, we have no Senator McGuinness joined in.
Just very briefly, if I may. Very interesting comments. How many cases would you have taken on with, I wouldn't have thought there'd be all that many. But you've alluded or mentioned earlier that you've had a number and you've appeared before the Supreme Court of Canada. Have you had quite a number?
I have. It seems like we have a lot of elections in Canada. We have municipal elections, which I've been involved in litigating. In fact, participated in a long process of inquiry into the question of whether or not mail-in ballots had been used to defraud the electoral system in Calgary. At the provincial level, I've been involved with a number of cases where individuals have said, I had a problem with my nomination process, and somebody voted, they were outside the boundaries, and I wanted to challenge. We went all the way up to the Court of Appeal of Alberta on that one. So federally, prisoner voting rights have been something that I've focused on at several different levels. We've also looked at federal, I guess you could call them recounts, judicial supervised recounts, where basically all the lawyers and probably 20 different staff from the court just sat in a room like this for 2 days and counted ballots. And the judge just walked amongst the ballot counters to make sure everybody was doing their job. So I think it may not be quite as dramatic as Bush v. Gore, but the fact is we've had a number of cases that have gone to court. And interestingly enough, since the recent decisions by the courts of appeal to push out of the courts all of the nomination processes and put them back in the hands of the parties, we've actually had a reduction in the number of cases that have gone to court, I would say, over the last 5 years. So I think it's been better over the last 5 years, but as we can see, the litigation continues, and there's a lot of it.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier today in a perhaps a different manner that change is always there's always opposition to it.
Sure.
And eliminating vouching will indeed, it'll be a difficult thing, but education of the public, and after an election or two, people will understand that they have to have the proper ID, and it'll come to pass. So this has been very interesting, and I must go away and read some of these cases.
There's a lot of them, and certainly on the vouching issue of going back. I mean, I have been in balloting stations, I guess, with polls where individuals have turned around and gone back and come back with the right ID. So it is important enough to individuals that they will do that. So even if they find out at the last minute that they needed to do that, there's probably going to be time for them to go home, because polling stations often are not that far away.
Absolutely.
And I've unfortunately seen people not be able to make it onto an air flight because they didn't have the right ID. So today, for the average person, they know that when they go somewhere, they better take their ID with them.
Very good.
Senator Moore?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chipeur, for being here. I want to change the topic from vouching to the matter of Elections Canada and its role. I just want to read to you, we all received an email from Ms. Paula Tripp of Maple Leaf, Ontario. She raised about a dozen points where she thinks this act should be changes to this bill. But one, and I'll read this, moreover, under this law, as it is written, Elections Canada will not even be able to tell Canadians whether fraud has occurred or even whether there have been complaints. In addition, the bill does not deal at all with the need to give Elections Canada the power to compel testimony, the very thing which is at the heart of its failure to have gotten to the bottom of the attempt at electoral fraud that has been found by a federal court justice to have indeed occurred during the previous federal election. That was a robocall scandal. Do you have any comments on that?
My understanding is that it's not that there won't be an ability to communicate, it's a question of changing the communicator, so that the roles have changed. The Chief Electoral Officer's role has been narrowed, and the communication role has been transferred to another official that has responsibilities to a minister in the government. And my understanding of the reasoning for that, and I certainly have never talked to the minister about it, so I don't know if this is in fact true, but my understanding is that that creates political accountability for the task of educating and informing, and if in fact it doesn't happen, then there is someone who can be held accountable, where with a Chief Electoral Officer who is an official or an official officer of Canada, of the Parliament of Canada, is not really accountable during that time to anyone. And if there is some concerns, there's nobody to take your concern to. So I would think it would be easier to ensure that there's education afterwards because of the political pressure on the minister responsible to get that job done.
The Chief Electoral Officer appeared before us earlier today, and he certainly gave evidence to the fact that he does do and has done matters of educating the public and of bringing issues to the attention of the public when that needed to happen. Do you think it's good or bad for him to no longer continue to do that?
My view is someone should do it. I think it's important. All of these changes that are coming down need to be transmitted and communicated to the voters. Who does it is, in my view, less important than the fact that it is done. I don't think that there is a right answer. I think it's a matter of parliamentary preference. I think that the Chief Electoral Officer in the past has done an admirable job over the last 3 or 4 CEOs that I've had the opportunity to interact with. They've all done a good job with that. That's not a problem, but the fact that you would create another person to carry out those activities, in my view, is a parliamentary, it's a question of discretion for Parliament, and as long as it is done, then I think that I would be happy as both a participant in the system and as someone who has observed the way that it's happened over the last few decades.
So it's a matter of government policy.
I think that in our that's right. I think in our parliamentary system, having ministers responsible is probably a good thing, and I think that when you have an officer of Parliament, that officer should have very specific responsibilities, and whatever those responsibilities are, that officer must be held accountable for fulfilling. If there are some activities that Parliament decides to take away from that officer, I don't think that's a good or bad. It's not a constitutional or unconstitutional question. It's a question of parliamentary policy and a decision by Parliament as to how that activity is to be accomplished.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thank you.